Okay, so hello everyone. This is it's a brain thing. We have to do this again because this is all being filmed and everything for TV. So tonight we're going to have a discussion about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And luckily, since I'm not much of a child psychiatrist, actually the opposite extreme, I'm more of a geriatric psychiatrist, and I don't know a lot about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, I'll admit that. So I have a special guest with me tonight, Dr. Shelton from the Indianapolis area, trained with me in residency and did a child psychiatry fellowship, and she's certainly an expert at treating ADHD, and so she's going to go over ADHD with you, and then we'll have some questions towards the end. And I think usually we keep this pretty informal, so if you want to ask questions through the talk too, that's fine. I'll turn this over to Dr. Shelton.
Thanks for having me here tonight, and as Dr. Henley said, I'm going to be talking about ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, and some of you may be familiar with ADD as well, but it's all now categorized under the ADHD heading, and then we subcategorize it by subtype. So I'm going to be referring to all types as ADHD just for simplicity's sake. And how we subcategorize it is ADHD inattentive type, which was the previously known ADD, and then there's ADHD hyperactive impulsive type, and then probably the most common one is ADHD combined type, where you have features of both. With ADHD, we look for obviously symptoms that meet the inattentive type. There's generally 9 particular symptoms that we typically try to tease out and find out about. And to meet the criteria, the person has to meet 6 of the 9. And generally, when the criteria was originally developed and put into the DSM-4, the age groups that they did the studies on and we're looking at were they between the ages of 4 and 16. So that's generally the age group that we apply the criteria to. And if they meet 6 of those 9 criteria, that generally puts them in at least the 93rd percentile for having ADHD. So we can be pretty confident that if all of those are there, that it's something that is really a true diagnosis. Some of the criteria I'll go through, and most of them I do know, but I did bring some cheat sheets to keep me on track. But the inattentive symptoms are that they often fail to give close attention to detail. They tend to rush through things and make careless mistakes. We also see them having that difficulty with sustaining attention. And a lot of times we're going to be looking for these symptoms to be present in more than just one setting. So, you'll see it at home and with some things to varying degrees, and also at school. And we may not see the symptoms to the same degree in each of the settings, but generally we'll see some of it there. And certainly in my practice, that's something that I will hear a lot as well, is that, well, at home we see that, but maybe not so much at school, and vice versa. So, and that's a pretty common, well-known phenomenon. So the difficulty sustaining the attention in tasks, or even in some play activities, depending on the severity of it, doesn't seem to listen when spoken to directly. And sometimes, you do have to kind of tease that out. It's like, is it just that selective hearing that all children seem to have? And is there an oppositional kind of a flavor there where they just don't want to hear it? Or is it more of that where they're focused on something else and you really have to get their attention to get them to listen, and find yourself repeating things over and over? Fail to follow through with instructions. And again, that's something that we do have to tease out about whether or not, that's just oppositionality, or did they get distracted onto something else. And, sometimes that can be a bit difficult, and certainly kids who have ADHD do have some comorbidities with some of the other disorders, and I can get into some of that a little bit later, but we also can see some what we call secondary oppositionality just because of the ADHD in and of itself. They generally will have difficulty with organization, and that can be a big one. You know, a lot of times they just have a hard time figuring out how to put things together in a step-by-step organized type of a fashion. And that's kind of how do they go about completing tasks, and do they have the materials and the things that they need to complete those things, or are they always going, oh gee, I forgot that, so I gotta go get that, a pencil or a paper. And that leads to another one of the symptoms that we look for, is that they're often forgetful. So those kind of go together. They do tend to be forgetful in daily activities, and that's one of our criteria. Another criteria that's related to that is that they tend to lose things required for tasks and activities. You'll hear about them leaving homework at school, or they didn't bring it home, they didn't bring home the books that they needed, or vice versa. They'll complete their homework, but they forget it at home, and kind of that back and forth issue. We hear about that quite a bit. Another thing that they tend to do, which a lot of times can also be perhaps misconstrued as being oppositional, is that if something does require sustained mental attention, a lot of times they do try to avoid it. They dislike it, and because it is difficult for them, and they do tend to be reluctant to engage in those types of activities and tasks. And that is, again, one of our criteria. And sometimes, like I said, it's not always easy to fully tease out whether it's oppositional or not, so you kind of have to put the full picture together. And again, if they have any 6 of these 9 criteria, they'll meet the criteria for ADHD and attentive type. Now with the hyperactive impulsive symptoms, with the hyperactivity, a lot of times we'll hear